Okay folks, so welcome to lesson 13. Unlucky for some, but not us. This is going to be a fantastic lesson. I'd like to spend 5 minutes so far, just spend 5 minutes answering these 6 questions in your exercise books, please. Do make sure you do it properly, and we'll go through the answers on the next slide. I will see you in 5. So why is geographical inquiry worth doing? Well, we do it to learn more about how the world works. That's the whole point in research, remember. We want to test theories that already exist and find out whether they apply to all given locations. And, you know, it's all about getting closer to the truth. Fieldwork is part of that overall geographical inquiry process, which is basically collecting data in the environment that you are studying. All right, collecting data in the field. That might be a city, it might be a river, it could be a whole host of things. Primary data is collected by the researcher, secondary data is collected by someone else, and we have to sample. So if we take a whole population, we have to sample because it's more practical. You know, if we tried to sample the whole population, then it would be too expensive, it would be too time consuming, so we have to try and take samples that represent that overall population. We're not going to go into detail on these, but the 3 types of sample are stratified, random, and systematic. Okay, so for the first task, we are going to recap some ideas around geographical inquiry and fieldwork. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to replay you 3 slides from the first lesson of this topic, and it's really, really important that you watch all 3 of them. One of them will include a do now slide. I don't want you to do the do now slide, but I'm leaving it in there just so that you can look back at it and see if you now understand those ideas in a new context, now that you've had a go at doing one full kind of human geography inquiry, as we get ready for our physical geography inquiry beginning today. Okay, so this do now task might seem a little bit bizarre, but I want you to just stick with me on it for a few minutes. So this person here, this is Dan, all right? Dan loves swans, okay? He's been observing swans and looking at swans all of his life. Now, every swan that Dan has ever seen is white. Therefore, he reckons that we can deduce this law from that. All swans are white. But my question to you, and I want you to have a good think about this, is can that law be true? Can any scientific law or rule be 100% true? And how can we test if his hypothesis or if his law is true or not? Spend a couple of minutes thinking about that. I know it's a little bit strange. Write down some of your ideas and I'll go through some thoughts on that on the next slide in a second. So pause the video now and have a go at doing that. Now, I would argue that actually, no, we can't say for certain that law is true. You know, just because a person who has only seen white swans all of their life, that's not enough to then say, well, all swans must be white. It might just be that we haven't seen a black swan yet. As Karl Popper puts in this quote here, no number of sightings of white swans can prove the theory that all swans are white. The sighting of just one black swan may disprove it. And that's where kind of this idea of research comes in academia, in all subjects, not just geography. Now, okay, I accept that some mathematical laws, you could argue, are indisputable. You know, like 1 + 1 is 2. Like, we don't need to collect any more evidence about that. But certainly in physical geography and in human geography and almost every other discipline that I can think of, that isn't the case. So instead, research, so going out there and collecting information about how the world works, just helps us to arrive closer and closer and closer to the truth. Okay, we may never actually reach the truth. We can get a really good sense of what the truth might be, but it might be that it's just about collecting more and more information towards that end goal as we develop an ever more detailed knowledge of how the world works. And that's especially important in geography, given that the world is dynamic. Okay, it's constantly changing. And in this first lesson today, this is of our new topic. This is all about kind of getting to grips with what we mean by research, or what we mean by something called geographical inquiry, okay? And how geographical inquiry will be featured in your GCSE geography exam. A geographical inquiry is a process of investigation to find an answer to a question, or a series of questions, in order to know more about how the world works. In geography, that usually involves field work. So the data that we collect to answer questions about how the world works is collected in real environments, often outdoors. Geographical inquiry usually follows a particular sequence. Okay, whether that's GCSE students doing it, A-level students doing it, or real researchers and academics in universities. Now, in the exam, each question will come from one of these stages of the geographical inquiry process. So it's really important that you understand all 6 of those stages, and we'll take you through them over the next couple of weeks. The stages of a geographical inquiry include, first of all, setting up an inquiry question and understanding the context of the study. So what questions are you going to ask? What are you trying to find out? What is it about the world that you want to understand better? Once you've asked those questions, it's time to decide and plan what methods will be used to collect data in order to answer those questions. So we collect the data. Once data has been collected, and again, often, as I've said before, that can include through fieldwork in real environments, then it's important to present that data in a visual fashion, in ways that make it easy to interpret and understand. So on maps, using graphs, bar charts, etc., whatever that might be. Fourthly, it's time to analyse and interpret the data next. So saying what that data means and why it might have shown what it did. Fifthly, you make conclusions. So that's where you bring all of this data together that you've been and collected, and you answer the questions that you sought to answer at the very beginning of the project or the inquiry. Finally, all good research projects or geographical inquiries, they evaluate what happened. Okay, so they take each stage of the process and they talk about the strengths and the weaknesses throughout. They may even make recommendations about what future research might consider if they were to further knowledge in a particular area. So that's the geographical inquiry process, and as I was saying, any of the questions on the exam could be related to any one aspect of this geographical inquiry. So it could be about asking questions. It could be that you have to analyse some data. They might even get you to present some data, so to complete a bar chart or something like that. The questions could come from any of these stages. So thank you for watching those recap slides, and yes, I am wearing the same suit jacket and tie as in those slides, and I have had a little bit of a DIY haircut, and I can assure you that that is entirely coincidental. What we're going to do then in this lesson is focus on these 2 phases of the geographical inquiry. I'm going to tell you what our research overall inquiry question is, and then our research questions that sit underneath that, or our hypotheses that sit underneath that for our physical geography inquiry. And then we're just going to tentatively look at some of the stage 2 stuff, so some method based things, focusing purely around our study location, so where we would have gone and done this project. With that in mind, please get down today's title and date, which is Rivers Fieldwork Introduction. And what we're going to look at in today's lesson is what the geographical inquiry is, what the research questions are that sit underneath that, why that's worthy of study, and then we're going to do some work on the study location and site. So where we would have gone and done this, and what sites would we have selected on that particular river. So have a read of our individual inquiry question. So how and why do drainage basin and channel characteristics influence flood risk for people and property along the River No? So what we're going to do is we're going to take a river, the river that we're going to look at is called the River No, and we're going to explore flood risk. Okay, and we're interested, according to this inquiry question, about how flood risk for people and property, how that changes along a river's long profile. Okay, how does that flood risk change along a river's long profile? And what we're interested in particular, should I say, is how the drainage basin, okay, so the area of land that collects water for the river and its tributaries, and the channel, so the actual passageway that the river's travelling through, how those 2 things influence that changing flood risk. Okay, so what is the changing flood risk along the long profile, and how is that changing flood risk explained by or influenced by what the drainage basin is like at different points on the river and what the channel is like at different points on the river. Now, You might think, well, why are we bothering doing that? Well, it comes back down to this idea of research, doesn't it? Yes, we probably already have an idea about what happens to flood risk as we move along the long profile. We probably already have an idea of how drainage basin and channel characteristics might influence that flood risk if we pause and think about it. But actually, the whole point in research is not necessarily always to discover brand new things, but to reaffirm and to check whether what we already know applies to all locations, or whether there are any kind of nuances or slight changes depending on the location. And it might be that, you know, that all that we know on rivers may never have been studied professionally by academics along this particular river. So we can say, therefore, that this is a worthy area of study. But of course, as is always the case, or is often the case with overall inquiry questions, it's quite broad. And we need to break that down into individual research questions that we can deal with step by step. Now, I'm going to show them to you as research questions, but of course, as you already know, we could look at these instead as hypotheses, which are statements that can be accepted or refuted or rejected. So the first research question coming from that is, first of all, well, does the flood risk increase? So a hypothesis version would be along the lines of flood risk increases along the long profile of the River No. Then we need to say, well, right, what happens to the channel? What changes in channel characteristics occur along the long profile of the River No? We need to know about the drainage basin. So what changes in drainage basin characteristics occur along the long profile of the River No? And then we probably need a fourth research question to bring it all together, because we're sort of saying, right, what's happening to the flood risk? How does the drainage basin change? How does the channel characteristics change? But this inquiry wants us to know how the latter two things influence the first. So we probably need a research question that brings all that together. So how can changes in channel and drainage basin characteristics be linked to changing flood risk? All right, team, so now you know what the geographical inquiry topic area is. And you know what the research questions are. And I hope that the 3 lessons from last week, you're thinking, I'm glad we did that Rivers recap now, because all of this is going to make a little bit more sense. What I want to talk about now is, before we talk about the individual methods that we're going to kind of adopt, we'll do that next lesson, I actually want us to think purely about where we would have gone, all right, and why we would have gone there. All right, so let's have a look at where our study location is. Before I show you the maps, I want you to understand the context, and I want you to have a think about, in terms of the location that we've chosen, why is it a practical location? All right, so why, often with research, you know, we have to take into consideration just the practicalities of it, but also why is it good in terms of sites, so the ability to find valid information, so information that we need. And I want you to think about that as you read this first kind of background paragraph. So I'm going to put some text on the slide. I'd like to pause the video for 30 seconds or so and read the text through twice. Okay, so let's have a look at where Edale is, which is where the source of the River No is. So if you have a look on the map here, the red pin is where the village of Edale is, and the blue dot is where school is. Okay, so I would like you to do 2 things. I'd like you to describe the location of Edale, all right, using compass directions, and then I'd also like you to suggest why it was a practical studied location. So remember, the location is the general area, the site is the actual places where we stopped along the river. So for this, we're just thinking about the location. So where is Edale, the village where the river begins, and why is it a practical location for us at David Nieper Academy? There are some suggested kind of sentence structure that's at the bottom of the slide there. Pause the video and spend 5 minutes on that task. See you in a minute, or 5. So this is a black and white Ordnance Survey map of Edale. And basically what you've got is, you've kind of got the centre of the village of Edale here, up in the Peak District. And then what you've got is, this is the River No, which is our river. It eventually becomes the River Derwent, which goes through Chatsworth and then towards Derby. So this is the River No, and then what you've got, so this is what we might call one of the main tributaries of the River Derwent. But then what you've got is, you've got these smaller streams. So this is one of the smaller streams that goes into the River No, and another stream here that goes into the River No, and then they break up into other streams. Yeah, right near the source of all these rivers, so you can see all these little streams up here, yeah, and up here and up here and what have you, right? And we would have got off the bus in that yellow circle there, and we would have walked up to one of these first order streams, so somewhere roughly here, which we would consider to be the upper course. We would have gone on to a slightly wider part, a tiny little bit further down the long profile, but a river that's had more tributaries move into it. I might talk about that as being the middle course, but it's not truly the middle course, it's just lower down the upper course. Then we would have walked all the way back down through the village of Edale, and we would have gone to this point here on the River Noe, where the river is, you know, even more wider and deeper and flatter and all the rest of it. It's further down the long profile. So that's kind of where we would have gone. And again, in terms of practicalities, this is all within walking distance of each other, and that is very useful because it means we can collect more data, spend more time, you know, collecting data and less time kind of traveling. And it's also just useful because we've got these three very distinct and different types of the river, all within walking distance of each other, but we still need to find what the differences are across different points on the long profile, and this enables us to have the best of both worlds. I'm going to show you that again in a kind of 3D image of the area, just so you can get a sense of what it's like. So again, this is the overall area that you can see here. So this is the village of Edale, and we would have got dropped off around here. There's that's the coach park there. We would have then walked kind of all the way up into the more mountainous area to them first two streams, and one of the streams would have been about here and another stream would have been about here, and you can see that it's right up, you know, this around here would be your watershed. We're right up at the very, very source of the river, which is, I think, is really cool actually. So yeah, we would have gone here and we would have gone here. Then we would have walked all the way back down through these fields, kind of past this cottage, and we would have looked at a section of the river here. Okay, so you can see we're sort of seeing somewhere in the upper course or the very upper course, slightly further down, or what we might call a second order stream, and then further down again, a third order stream. And that's where we would have collected our primary data at each of those three locations. And again, as I said, incredibly useful because it allows us to spend less time traveling and more time collecting data when we can see those three different types of the river's course all within walking distance of each other. Alright, so this is really cool now, folks, because I've managed to zoom right into the first two locations that we would have gone. So the first order stream, or the very top of the upper course, and then the second order stream. And so you can see this tiny, tiny little stream in this very steep V-shaped kind of valley coming down here. This would have been our first order stream. And this goes through the trees here. Alright, and we would have got in the river here and we would have collected some data. Alright. You can actually see this river then here. This is the second order stream. So whether that kind of first tributary moves into a second, slightly wider tributary. You can just make out the slightly extended width of the river. I can actually see some of the big rocks in it though as well. And then it moves down here. So we would have gone, like I said, here, and then we would have collected some data here. So they're the first two order streams. Then we would have walked back down in this direction towards the village. Okay, and then finally we've got just another shot here. So we would have parked, as I said, we would have parked the coach here, walked up through the village, up into the hills, and then those two river locations that I've just shown you are kind of roughly here. We would have walked back down through here, and then we would have looked at this stretch of river here. Now it's quite hidden by trees, but it is much wider. It's in a much flatter floodplain. You can see the difference looking back up into the distance where we would have been in this whole flat floodplain area here. So I just want you to get a sense of what it would have looked like, sadly, had we been able to go. So one of the things that we would have done, and that you may still have to do in the exam, is take an OS map of an area and then draw an aerial sketch view of it. So your own kind of simplified version of the area based on the sketch map. So that's what I would like you to have a go at. Now, what do all good maps have on them? Three things. They've got a title, they've got a north arrow, and they've got a scale. And because this is an Ordnance Survey map, the grids that overlay the map are all 1 kilometre by 1 kilometre. So I can use that roughly to come up with a scale on the side. But in terms of the things that I'm going to, include, I'm going to include this kind of main road, and then perhaps this minor road that goes up through the village. I might include some of the buildings around the centre of Edale. I'm going to put some of these main stream patterns on there, and then I'm going to locate the 3 sites. Site 2, that's site 1, and this is site 3. And then once you've had a go at drawing this sketch map, I'd like you to write a paragraph that goes with it to explain our choice of study sites from a practicalities point of view. All right. Your sketch map might end up looking something a little bit like this. So you can, I'm hoping that you can match mine up to the real one here. So I've got the railway line on there, which is the black line. You've got the rivers. I've got the rough outline of the roads and just the main kind of stream patterns. I've also, given you the names of the 3 sites that we would have gone to. So as I said, your task now is to do your own version of my sketch using the map on the left. And then when that's complete, I'd like you to write a short paragraph to explain in detail why we are choosing this location, but also those sites within that location. Thank you. All right, ladies and gents, so you're nearly at the end of the lesson. I would like you now to go on to show my homework, and there is a quiz waiting for you on there that I've spent a lot of time writing. If you don't get 100% first time, please have up to 3 more attempts, okay? We need to make sure that we're getting our highest possible score. Once you've done that, you can move on to your next lesson for the day, and yeah, I will see you next time. I've been Mr. Ruddy. This has been Geography. It's goodbye from me. Goodbye.